The crash of 1929 and the Great Depression that followed in its wake was the most severe economic downturn in modern history. A huge financial bubble, record inequality, loose borrowing, and bad economic policies all combined to create a perfect storm of manufactured suffering. The impact on regular workers was so bad that many soldiers who fought in the Second World War said they preferred serving on ships in the Pacific because at least there they were supplied with rations and a place to sleep. But what a lot of people forget is that this downturn wasn't all that unusual at the time. Sure, the Great Depression was a little bit greater than the rest, but between 1900 and 1929, there were no less than 9 separate economic crashes, and at least 4 of those would be considered major recessions by today's standards. What makes this even more concerning is that today, almost 100 years later, economists and historians still don't fully understand what exactly caused the Great Depression. And if we don't properly understand the lessons of history, it makes it very hard to learn from them. The only thing is, by one means or another, we have actually gotten really good at avoiding economic recessions, at least on paper. Since the end of the Second World War, the frequency and severity of economic downturns has constantly declined. Now you might point to examples like 2008 and the lockdowns of 2020, but they are more the exceptions that highlight a rather concerning rule. The global economy really did take a beating 5 years ago thanks to lockdowns, but the average person actually saw their debts decline, savings increase, and overall financial situation improve. Beyond that, of course, some other people did far, far better. Almost a century on from the Great Depression, it looks like one of 2 things have happened. Either we have found a cure for economic crashes, or we have forgotten why we had these downturns in the first place.
We begin our coverage tonight of what's been called the worst financial crisis in modern times.
3 of the 5 biggest investment banks are gone.
Major sectors of America's financial system are at risk of shutting down.
They pushed an unprecedented $700 billion bailout package through Congress to shore up Wall Street investment banks.
When the virus is under control and our economy is ready for new growth.
Direct payments to most Americans. Checks will be sent to individuals of up to $1,200.
Alright, so before we get into the main course of chronicling economic devastation, might I suggest we start out like every video essay ever, with a nice fruity metaphor. Back in the 1800s and early 1900s, many American forests burned every 10 to 30 years. These were routine, and mostly low-intensity fires that cleaned out deadwood before it piled up. But when the mid-20th century rolled around, the US became very good at putting out fires. In 1935, the US Forest Service formally adopted the 10 a.m. policy, requiring that all fires be put out by 10 a.m. the next morning. A decade later, they launched the Smokey the Bear campaign, which encouraged Americans to take fire prevention into their own hands. Today, a combination of better training, satellite detection, more water resources, and Smokey the Bear have all made Americans better at detecting and fighting fires. But what they didn't realize was that stopping nature from running its course only postponed the burn, giving the next fire far more to feast on. So, when you suppress every tiny burn, the whole forest saves its anger for one giant meltdown. And economies are absolutely no different. For decades now, every time a small economic downturn tried to burn off the deadwood, policymakers stepped in to put it out. And it seems like for every crisis, no matter the size, we've done more and more to course correct. After the dot-com bubble burst in the early 2000s, interest rates were pushed down to levels they hadn't seen since the 1960s. This helped to keep the system chugging along in the short term by lowering repayments for average consumers and giving businesses easier access to loans to survive through the downturn. But it came with some consequences. Companies that should have gone out of business survived longer, capitalizing on low interest debt and government support that didn't fix their underlying business. But it did keep them alive for a little longer. These are called zombie companies, which we will get into in a bit. Now, typically good fiscal and monetary policy uses financial tools to help our economy recover when times are bad, and then puts away the adrenaline shots when times are good. After the crisis, if you can even call it that, had been all but dealt with, Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan kept interest rates at 1% for a full year. This might not seem bad, but it had a lasting impact. Banks seized this opportunity to start giving out more debt. People with poor credit scores were getting home loans that they otherwise couldn't afford, and hedge funds were coming up with creative financial instruments to package and sell this debt. It's worth noting that they did this because the incentive structures allowed them to. Mortgage lenders just sourced the loans and got paid a fee for doing so, and then they would package up those loans and sell them to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, a mortgage lending program created by the government. By the mid-2000s, Wall Street had built a house of kindling, and when the Federal Reserve started to raise interest rates, defaults on subprime mortgages sparked the global financial crisis, the worst downturn since the Great Depression. The government was quick to take action. In an election year, both the outgoing and incoming administrations were keen to throw money at the problem. Almost $1 trillion was directed towards the financial sector through various bailouts, recapitalizations, and stimulus programs. The central bank followed by bringing interest rates down to almost zero. Now, this made things better at the time, and the economy did slowly recover. But almost 2 decades later, it's still not clear if we fixed the problem or just masked the symptoms. The Emergency Economic Stabilization Act of 2008 purchased bad loans from banks to give them money to make more loans, and fraudulent activity went almost entirely unpunished. 2008 may have been a test on the financial system, but the results were clear across the economy. The idea of too big to fail might not exactly be shocking to you anymore, but it goes deeper than that. If smaller businesses are allowed to fail, while big businesses are coddled for the sake of economic stability, then they are effectively given a golden opportunity to buy the dip with the government's credit card. In fairness, the Dodd-Frank Act in 2010 did create guardrails to help prevent a similar financial crisis, including regulation around mortgage lending practices, bank stress tests, and establishing the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which might not be around for much longer.
No question about it, I am ready to get hurt again.
Anyway, the point is that learning from history is a lot easier when there isn't a profit to be made by forgetting it. Fast forward to 2020, and the whole world shut down because of COVID-19. Everyone was told to stay indoors to prevent the spread of the virus. Now, this would absolutely have catastrophic effects on the economy if left untouched. The federal government rushed to give stimulus checks to households and businesses through the CARES Act. Altogether, federal spending in response to COVID-19 amounted to almost $5 trillion. And the central bank launched a bazooka of stimulus as well, buying up government bonds and mortgages. This gave banks more money to lend, so that institutions and regular people wouldn't run out of money during the pandemic. The result was that, during a time when economic fundamentals, like being able to trade or work normally, were being undermined, the average person was actually getting richer, and the average business was getting more reckless. Because why wouldn't they? When wildfires were a frequent occurrence, they would burn off deadwood and sick trees, making way for new, healthier vegetation to take its place and get access to vital nutrients and sunlight. And when recessions run their course, they wipe out bad debts and failing businesses, so stronger, more innovative companies can grow in their place. The economist Joseph Schumpeter argued that economic downturns are effectively the economy's renewal cycle. Old, bloated, and unproductive companies fall apart, and bank loans and investment money flows into ideas worth building. He called this creative destruction, and said that economic downturns are needed much like the human body needs to detox. Companies that are not doing well leave the market, capital leaves to more promising technologies, and workers move to more productive jobs. When we don't let this process happen, we're left with zombie firms, or companies that are persistently unprofitable and only supported by cheap capital. An article by The Economist pointed out that if we follow this decades-long trend to its logical conclusion, then it might explain the current endemic of corporate consultants, crypto traders, and, well, influencers. But it might also show us a path to fixing them. Some estimates put the number of zombie companies today at around 9 to 20%. But couldn't these firms coexist? Why can't we have both Yellow Cab and Uber? Well, some very smart people, including this year's Nobel Prize winners, have been working on a solution to exactly this question. Basically, in order for creative destruction to happen, the zombie firms need to go to make way for new, innovative companies. So, we know that zombie companies are kept alive with low interest debt. And we know that recessions are a way to detox our economic system so that it doesn't become stuck with excessive fat. And you might be thinking after all of this, the solution to all of this would just be to let recessions run their course, right? Well, no. That would make things worse in a different, but much more painful way. So it's time to learn how history works, to find out how we forgot to have the right type of recession. This week's video is sponsored by The Book from Hungry Minds. Hungry Minds is an international group of artists, scientists, architects, designers, and entrepreneurs who create unique cultural projects. And their latest is The Book, the ultimate guide to rebuilding a civilization. It is a captivating, illustrated encyclopedia covering humankind's greatest inventions and discoveries. But it is not just a book. It takes you on a visual journey through the history of innovation, blending beauty, intellect, and inspiration in a way that makes it perfect as a gift for collectors, curious friends, or colleagues. With over 400 pages, 180 topics, and 23 chapters, it features unique illustrations that combine engineering drawings with medieval art styles, all printed on premium matte paper with a laminated hardcover. What surprised me most when I flipped through it was how it mixes history, science, art, and design so seamlessly. I found myself getting lost in spreads about ancient inventions that shaped our world. And it gave me new insights into how civilizations rose through creativity and problem solving. Plus, there is a hidden quest inside that adds an extra layer of intrigue, like a puzzle for readers to discover. This book delivers rare knowledge that inspires deeper thinking, and its visual aesthetics create a premium feel that appeals to both technical minds and those who love humanities. It was a top Kickstarter project that raised over $2.3 million, involved more than 50 professionals, and became a bestseller in 2023. If you are looking for the perfect gift for someone with a curious mind, or even for yourself, this is it. Head over to the link in the description, use code HISTORYWORKS10 for a discount, and grab your copy today. So there are two reasons why we don't let recessions just do their thing. The first reason is that recessions that are left unattended are absolutely devastating. And the first way to demonstrate this is by looking at the Panic of 1873. After the American Civil War, America threw itself into an industrial growth spurt. Railroads were being laid across the country at record speed, and investors were pouring money into anything with tracks. Then, in 1873, the banking firm financing one of the biggest rail projects, J. Cook & Company, suddenly collapsed under the weight of its own optimism. What followed was a chain reaction. Dozens of railroads went bankrupt. Nearly 18,000 businesses failed, and unemployment climbed to 14%. Factories shut down, wages were slashed, and the crisis eventually sparked nationwide railroad strikes, leaving hundreds of people dead. But as bad as this was, an even bigger economic crisis was already on the horizon. By 1893, America was at the tail end of its Gilded Age, when the entire country thought the good times were going to last forever. Railroads were quickly being built, connecting cities across the country, and manufacturing was exploding. Then overnight, it kind of just stopped. Railroads started going bankrupt, investors panicked, and people rushed to pull their money out of banks. When banks no longer have deposits to lend, they closed their doors, and since there was no FDIC to insure deposits, those who didn't take their money out lost everything. What followed was a closure of over 500 banks, 15,000 companies, and a national unemployment rate of around 20%, with some states reaching almost 50%. Entire working-class families lost their homes. The fallout was so intense that it even triggered the Pullman strikes in 1893. The Pullman Company was a Chicago-based passenger rail car manufacturer and rewarded their employees with a little utopia of houses, manicured streets, and everything that their employees would need to work and live. Kind of like what the tech companies were trying to be, except without the beanbags and kombucha. When things got bad, the company reduced employee wages by up to 30% to account for the falling sales. But the problem was that they still had to pay the same amount in rent. The company's workers started to strike, and the company refused to negotiate with the workers. So, they turned to the American Railway Union for help, and help they did. The ARU ordered rail workers across the country to stop handling trains that had Pullman cars attached. Within days, rail traffic west of Detroit basically stopped. At its peak, around 250,000 workers in 27 states were involved in some way. The federal government stepped in, and President Grover Cleveland sent 12,000 troops to make the railroads run again. Riots broke out, boxcars were burned, and tracks were torn up, leaving 30 workers dead and many more wounded. So yeah, when you look at it like that, a little bit of economic support could probably have helped avoid something like this, especially considering the fact that the cars weren't a creative destruction waiting to rip into an industry for another 15 years. Yet almost 40 years later, America would face something far worse. The single most devastating financial collapse in its history. The Great Depression wasn't just another downturn. It was the moment the entire economic system seemed to fall out from under the country. Banks failed by the thousands, wiping out entire life savings of working people overnight. And since there was no unemployment insurance, losing your job meant your income went to zero. Workers who kept their jobs saw wages collapse, and many families found themselves skipping meals or sending their children to work just to keep the lights on. Bank runs resulted in people lining up outside of locked doors, with the hope that their bank still had something in their vaults. Most didn't. And if things weren't already bad enough, the Dust Bowl hit. Years of drought and collapsing crop prices turned huge parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, and New Mexico into a giant bowl of sand. Cities like Tulsa, Enid, and Amarillo saw unemployment skyrocket because the work simply wasn't there anymore. So families packed up whatever they could fit into their cars and moved west, hoping California had anything left for them. Most of the time, it didn't. People took matters into their own hands, and the Bonus Army marched on Washington. 20,000 World War I veterans demanded early payment of their service bonus certificates. This resulted in President Hoover ordering the US Army to tear gas and set the protesters' camps on fire. So yeah, this is what an economic crisis looks like when nobody steps in. The second reason we don't let recessions run their course is because they almost never punish the people who cause the problems. Since the 1970s, workers have been getting way more productive, meaning people are making more stuff, doing more work, and creating more value than ever before. Before, productivity growth typically matched wage growth, but since the 1970s, wages have fallen behind productivity gains. Productivity has increased by 87%, while hourly wages have only increased by 33%. Now, I'm going to pull up that chart again, and I want to see if you notice anything strange. Do you see it? The periods after financial crises are when the gaps between wages and productivity gains increase the most, meaning that it wasn't workers who reaped the benefits of productivity gains. It was, as you can probably guess, business and asset owners. Another way to visualize this is looking at wage growth for high, middle, and low wage workers in this chart. And I only need you to look at wage growth between the groups after the dot-com bubble and the global financial crisis. Yeah, it's pretty bleak. But I have one more depressing statistic for you. We saw the same trend in, well, house prices. While the median home price represented 3.6 times the average salary in 1985, it has shot up to represent 5.3 times the average home price in 2023. We have covered this problem extensively on How Money Works, so I won't step out of my lane here. But the point is that actions that the government and central bank take have done more to help the people who caused these problems than they have to help those hurt by the problems. So, if we let recessions run their course, they will hurt working people more than they help asset owners. But if we step in to fix them, then we will help asset owners more than we will help working people, right? Well, the problem is that we've forgotten how to have a healthy recession. We saw a little bit of what a healthy recession should look like with the stimulus checks of 2020. Sure, it ended up with some people YOLOing it all on GameStop or AMC stocks, but at least that was working people doing it, and not a hedge fund who's first in line for another bailout. This cash was given directly to citizens, encouraging creative destruction. Workers started moving to where demand was growing and away from areas where demand was shrinking. Economic downturns will always hurt, but the people who should feel it first are the businesses and investors who took the risks, not the workers, who had no say in any of it. And helping regular people through a recession isn't just good social policy, it's good economic policy. Keeping workers employed keeps productivity up and spending power alive. And letting deadweight companies shut down might be painful in the short term, but it's what makes innovation and long-term growth possible. Politicians and central banks are often reluctant to do this though, because there's a belief that anything that could slow down productivity could put one country behind the next. Now, if you're hoping politicians will change course and put workers first, yeah, that's probably not happening anytime soon. But if you want to see when everything really went sideways, go watch our video on what the happened in 1971. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how history works.